Welcome to the Orthocast. Today my guest is Olga. She is a cradle Orthodox Christian born in Serbia, now living in America, and she has lots of experience in education, being a political analyst, lots of geopolitical issues. And so now she's starting this Christian Orthodox coalition, which we're going to talk about in this interview. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So my first question for you is, how was it being raised Orthodox? What was your upbringing like?
So, interestingly enough, and thank you for that lovely introduction, and I'll
Mhm.
get into my background, professional background, a little more later. But I was born in a country called Yugoslavia
Mhm.
at the time, in Belgrade, which today, at that time, was capital of Yugoslavia. Today is the capital of Serbia. So, having been born in Yugoslavia in the 70s, I'm dating myself here, um, late 70s, early 80s. You are growing up in a country that was somewhat of an experiment, that's sort of a socialist communist experiment, where when I was born and then going through elementary school, I was a pioneer, quote unquote, in schools because we were ruled at the time by a man called Marshal Tito, Josip Broz Tito. So the country was an experiment of a socialist communist demeanor, but not quite behind the Iron Curtain as the Soviet Union and many other Eastern European countries. Serbia and Yugoslavia at the time, it's a South Central Europe, or the Balkans, what we
Mhm.
call the Balkans at this moment. And Yugoslavia was not a country that at that moment really paid much attention to religion. It was not as harshly prosecuted as it was in other very harshly communist countries. But at the same time, we did not really, unless your parents were really devout, um, either Christians or Muslims, which we can get into how much Serbs were allowed to be Orthodox Christians versus the Croats and the Bosnian Muslims to be who they were religiously.
Mhm.
There was an element of Yugoslavia that suppressed Serbian nation, Serbian ethnicity, Serbian nationhood, essentially because Serbia is one of the oldest kingdoms in Europe. So Serbs were somewhat, um, I would say, enslaved within the constraints of Yugoslavia. So as a child, I was not really Orthodox Christian. Yes, I was born Orthodox Christian, but our parents were not really born in that environment where religion was at the forefront. Now, my grandfather was in the military, in the
Mhm.
Yugoslav military. So I remember my grandmother actually talking about baptizing my father and his two brothers kind of in secret, not because my grandfather was a huge communist. He actually was forced into early retirement because he wouldn't be a part
Wow.
of or a member of the Communist Party. But at the time, it was looked down upon to actually baptize your children and to openly profess your faith, simply because being a part of the country called Yugoslavia, the socialist communist dogma was much more important at the time. And as we were growing up, little children, as I said, we were pioneers with like little blue hats and,
Mhm.
red ribbons around our necks. And so there was a lot of that type of not harsh communism, but certainly that type of ideology where religion really was not discussed until, unless you had family members who were not, let's say, in big cities. And that's always that was always a difference. I remember
Mhm.
going to visit like friends and their grandparents or aunts and uncles who lived in smaller towns or villages were much more prone to celebrate Christian holidays, where the city people, kind of like the division that we even have today,
Yeah.
the city people were cool and were thinking about other things. But I would say that there was an element to Yugoslavia that was suppressive of religion, particularly of something that drives Orthodox Christian Serbs as a nation, as an ethnicity. So in the 1990s, when Yugoslavia started collapsing and falling apart, something that you go back to inherently as spiritually and culturally, is actually your faith. So I want to say that a lot of people that grew up in Yugoslavia that really didn't have that religious experience, simply because that was the environment, kind of went back to their original roots, to their DNA, which for us Serbs was obviously Orthodox Christianity. So, and one thing about Yugoslavia, as I said, as harsh it was about certain things, we grew up, unlike other communist countries, with very westernized in a way. So, we grew up with Disney and rock music and speaking English and watching movies, and just like any American or a Brit would grow up at the time. I learned English. Our classrooms were set in such a way where in like fourth grade of elementary school, you get a foreign language. I happened to be in an English classroom. My friends were either in French classrooms, German classrooms. So, I mean, everybody was learning a foreign language. Some did learn Russian. So it was just simply, where you fall into. So it was much more open culturally in a way, socially and culturally. And again, Yugoslavia was that balance between East and West. It actually never belonged to that harsh communism. It was not behind the Iron Curtain, especially because Tito said no to Stalin in 1948. And then it had a really good relationship with the entire Western world. So I think when Tito died, he was one of those leaders that had, I think, the largest funerals to date that were attended by, both members of the Western governments and Eastern nations. And Yugoslavia was actually a founder of the non-aligned movement. So Serbia today continues to kind of operate in that sense of non-alignment militarily. So never belonged to NATO, was bombed by NATO. We can talk about and never really belonged to the Warsaw Pact. So that tradition continues. Serbs were always very freedom-loving people, liberating themselves from the Ottoman Empire, having been under the influence of the Ottoman Empire for about 500 years, depending on what region you're looking at. But Orthodox faith and Orthodox Christianity was actually something that helped the Serbs survive, not only survive the Ottomans, but survive this sort of communist, socialist period. So I would say, even when you look at Serbia, when you look at some of these other countries, we look at them sometimes and go, oh, they're just commies. But communism is like a speck of time within very lengthy histories of these nations that span over 1,000, even more years, I would say, looking at, for example, the oldest kingdom, one of the oldest kingdoms, such was Serbia in the Balkans and in Europe. So that was kind of my upbringing. As I said, in the 1990s, everybody kind of started getting back to their roots, to their to who we were as ethnicities, as people, and what was at the base of our culture and of our founding. And of course, our faith is one of the major pillars that, as I said, kind of helped us survive very, very harsh historical periods.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Yeah, I go to a Serbian parish, so learning the history of Serbia and how like intertwined the church and the faith is with the national identity is really amazing. I think that's how all nations should function and have functioned in the past, where the faith is the guiding principle that brings the nation together.
And you're right on that. And I would argue that our faith, our common Christian faith, informs who we are as Americans as well. If you look at the Ten Commandments versus, looking at our Constitution, what the founding fathers have in mind, I'm very sure and very certain, as most of us are, that was what they were thinking, along the lines of the Ten Commandments. So I think we were founded on those principles, and many nations, as you said, have been founded on some of those principles, even though we are secular nations. So is Serbia, so is the United States, so are many countries around the world but the prism of our faith and what we live through our faith and through, Lord Jesus Christ is something that informs your life on the daily basis, even though we don't realize it at times.
Yeah. Another interesting thing I learned about, Serbian history is how the, historical battles and spiritual really they overlap each other. Like the Battle of
Yes, they
Kosovo
truly do.
and King Lazar and all these Serbian saints who went out and fought this battle for their land, and this is still commemorated as a holiday
Yes.
in the Orthodox Church. And seeing what's going on in Kosovo to this day, where now it's not the Ottomans and Muslims. Well, I mean there still are
The
Muslims there.
remnants of,
Yeah, the remnants of, but
essentially.
there's different geopolitical powers. You mentioned earlier how NATO bombed Yugoslavia, and it was 1999. A lot of people
Yes.
aren't even aware of this. They think that the U.S., our geopolitical strategy is just to make peace, but in a lot of cases, it's very aggressive. It seems.
Well, and that's the thing. I think Yugoslavia serves as one of those prime examples of at what point NATO became obsolete
Hmm.
and why it continued, and how Yugoslavia and what was happening with the breakup of Yugoslavia and then the subsequent bombing of Serbia gave NATO second wind and gave it new life, because it truly was obsolete. Because if we remember what NATO was a defensive, it was supposed to be the defensive
Yes.
alliance to counter the Warsaw Pact. And it made sense at the time.
Yeah.
And, many people around the world were looking at it as an alliance for good. Well, once Warsaw Pact collapsed, was there a role any longer for NATO to exist? But you have to look at all of these generals that were, and everybody else, all the bureaucrats that are part of NATO that have enjoyed great benefits having been a part of it. So there's a huge transfer of wealth that happens through these organizations. And, as I said, many, many benefits and ranks and things like that. So nobody wants to give those up.
Yeah.
And once Yugoslavia, as I said, since Yugoslavia was that balance between East and West and truly was respected as a nation by both the United States and the Soviet Union at the time, and served as a balance between the two, essentially, as a non-aligned country. At some point, as Warsaw Pact collapsed and NATO was getting a second wind, well, Yugoslavia was deemed unnecessary any longer.
Hmm.
So it was very easy to manipulate. And the way it was manipulated is actually going back to some of these historical injustices and wrongs
Hmm.
that have happened throughout World War I and World War II and Serbian uprisings and throughout the Ottoman Empire and the conquest of that region. Hence, we have the Muslims in the Balkans. They are essentially Islamized Serbs, or to a certain degree, some Islamized Catholic Croats, but much more Serbs than anything. So, and that is the identity thing that now continues sowing discord in that region.
Hmm.
Because, after so many generations born under an Ottoman conquest and Ottoman rule, yes, certain elements of the Serbs survived and kept their faith and maintained who they were and fought the Ottomans viciously and actually liberated Europe, essentially, at the gates of Vienna. I mean, the Serbs and other Christians protected the rest of the Europeans from the further
Yeah.
Ottoman conquest. And this is how the Western Europeans essentially repaid us later, by throwing us under the bus and actually sticking up for the radical Islamic elements that were operating in the Balkans with the help of the United States and the Clinton administration, essentially. I don't want to say why the United States, but the Clinton
Hmm.
administration and NATO. So, it's interesting to look at the position of the United States today, not only within NATO, but within the global geopolitical context, and then how our faith plays a role into that. And, as I said, why we have Islamic elements in the Balkans and the kind of wars that have been fought historically to prevent the Islamic penetration into Europe, Well, now when you look at immigration and everything else that's going on, especially in Western Europe,
Hmm.
you kind of go back and think, well, why did we fight this much? Because now they're winning that battle without a shot fired.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, most people in the West aren't even aware of this basically this great wall that the
Yep,
Balkans acted as to hold back Muslim invasions in the Ottoman
exactly.
Empire for centuries.
And
And
terrible things
yeah.
that have gone on, not just holding off, and protecting the Europeans, but the sacrifices that Christians have made in that region,
Hmm.
particularly against Serbs and Greeks and Romanians and Hungarians, taking their children into Janjičari, jizya, which we call the blood tax that Serbs were paying essentially. And in order to protect your child from being taken by the Ottomans into Janjičari, and then later on that was their auxiliary army. Then later on they sent that army to fight. Literally, there are stories, numerous stories that are gruesome of moms recognizing their own children who come back after a couple of decades to fight and pillage and burn a village that's a Serbian village, but a child was taken and moms would recognize it. I mean, it's a really harsh history
Hmm.
that these people have gone through, and they continue going through harsh historical um, times even today. I mean, we're living history essentially. And you brought up why we started this new coalition, and we can talk about that. But if you look at the world today, every major conflict is in fact running or directly affecting Orthodox Christians.
Yes.
Not only Serbs in Kosovo and around the wider Balkans with the Republic of Srpska and in Montenegro, I mean, everywhere in that
Hmm.
region. But you look at even Cyprus with the Turks, you look at the Middle East,
Hmm.
Orthodox Christians are actually, this entire conflict is breaking over their back, but nobody is talking about it. Ukraine and Russia, Armenia and Azerbaijan. So, I mean, anywhere you point in the world, it's in fact Orthodox Christians that are paying a tremendous price of all of these foreign policy um, mistakes.
Hmm.
But mistake is almost even a banal word.
Yeah.
They're terrible things.
Hmm.
So hence the reason why we feel that Orthodox Christians in this country, in the United States, must have a seat at the table
Hmm.
in the political realm. Because if you look at the Catholics, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I kind of said, well, the Catholics are much more recognized and they actually do affect policy one way or the other, even though they may not be as organized as they would like. But everybody knows what the Catholic faith is in this country. Everybody knows the evangelicals, everybody knows the Jews, everybody knows the Muslims. But you say Orthodox Christians, and many Americans just sort of look at you and they don't even know where to begin because they have no idea what that means.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting throughout history that these different powers will use religion as a form of soft power and make strange alliances, like the West teaming up with Muslims for to combat certain people. Catholicism being used as a tool. In
Yes.
in the Balkans, it's Catholics, Orthodox, Muslims, and there's all these different interest groups and alliances. But back to this coalition, I think that's really important, is that people are more aware of what Orthodox Christianity is. And so many people are so focused on politics that it's important that we're involved in the culture, and politically is really important because that shapes the policy of our country. So my question is, so it's called the Christian Orthodox Coalition, and what exactly are like the policy positions? Like what are the most important things? Like is it more geopolitical, domestic, or?
So I'll give you a little bit of a
Hmm.
background first on myself.
Yeah.
I am an expert in several different regions, but mostly, as we discussed just now, South Central Europe and the Middle
Hmm.
East. I have a doctorate in political science and policy. I was a college professor in Chicago. I also was a special advisor to the Secretary General of Interpol Police. I've spent many years in international law enforcement, working on counterterrorism and transnational crime. So particularly having an expertise in foreign policies and being multilingual. I carry the highly qualified expert designation by the Office of Directorate of National Intelligence. So that is kind of, in short, my background.
Yeah.
And the political activism sort of came parallel to that simply because of everything that we have as Serbs, particularly lived through from the 1990s. You know, I've lived in this country as a legal immigrant, as an American by choice, since the 1990s, as Yugoslavia was breaking apart. I founded an ethnic media organization with my father. So everything that has happened politically and geopolitically has somewhat always gone through my own house, simply because of our connections and people that we know in that world. So having worked and having done what I've done and having the experience of being a political operative and a strategist, I'll give you a little bit of why Christian Orthodox Coalition. In 2016, we noted that elements in specific congressional districts where Serbs lived flipped from Hillary to Trump. And, you know, for obvious reasons, not liking the Clintons whatsoever, and Christian Orthodox Serbs being traditionally conservative and Republican. They didn't really know what they were getting into with Trump, but they certainly know what to expect from Hillary. So there was that kind of a spontaneous Serbs for Trump vote that happened in 2016. So with all of the relationships that I already had within the political realm, especially with President Trump's administration, I took that momentum and I formed an organization that's called Serbs for Trump. And hence we've been active since 2016, 2020, even 2022 primary elections. And of course, we continue being active in this election cycle. So Serbs for Trump was something that gave me an insight into the lack of political access, influence, and activism, especially on behalf of Serbs, but then as a united, wider front as Orthodox Christians. We really do not have, as I said, not only the seat at the table, but we don't have an organization that will represent all of our communities, whether it's Americans who have lately been finding Orthodox Christianity, and bless you guys and many of you like yourself and Jay and many of you I've been following. You're doing literally like godly work.
Thank you.
And I know that many Americans are turning to Orthodoxy because of, you know, what you guys are promoting and what you're doing. So having been around the campaign, we are an official coalition partner to President Trump's campaign. I thought that a wider Orthodox Christian coalition is way past overdue.
Yeah.
Where the Serbs, the Greeks, the Ukrainians, the Romanians, the Armenians, the Assyrians, the Russians, everyone can actually get together in this country and tell our story through the prism of our common lowest denominator, which is our faith. So our mission is essentially to educate people, but to also empower and engage wider Orthodox Christian community in this country, because we are not a separate entity in this nation. We have been here, as you guys point out many times, in the United States since late 1700s, the first missionaries that, came to the West Coast. And then, since you are in California, the first parish was formed by the Serbs, the Russians, and the Greeks in California. And that church still exists today. So, I mean, we've been the founding fabric of this nation, not as a separate entity, but as communities that have contributed greatly to not only the founding of this country, but to the greatness of what this country used to be. I mean, if you only look at some of the names, for example, George Fisher, who led the Texas Revolution, was one of the first Serbian immigrants to the United States. You have Nikola Tesla. You have all of these people that were actually so prominent and so profound within this nation, and we're openly Orthodox Christians, but yet as Orthodox Christians, we really don't have that specific power and access and influence in the civic process, in the discourse, in even, when you look at it through pop culture and entertainment. As I said, you say Orthodox Christians and everybody kind of looks at you weird because people don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And from, maybe you can correct me on this, I understand that between all of us who are born into Christianity, like Serbs and Greeks and whatever,
Mhm.
plus all of the Americans that are coming into Orthodoxy, it's between 10 to 12 million.
I think I saw that it was at around 7 million now, but
Okay.
it's been experiencing a lot of growth in the past few years, and a lot of the people Americans who are converting to Orthodoxy, like we have a lot of, like we're coming from similar political backgrounds too. And
Yes,
when we talk to Serbians, Russians, Greeks, we also agree a lot politically. So that's great if
exactly.
we can come together, cradle and convert, and come together and have like a coalition where we can be solid on all the issues.
And that's
Mhm,
exactly the idea behind
mhm,
Christian Orthodox Coalition. We just formed this organization about a month and a half ago.
mhm,
It's a Florida non-for-profit corporation currently. It's been incorporated. We have a great board. I'm the executive director. George Papadopoulos is the president of our board. His wife, Simona Mangiante, who is actually Italian, but now through her marriage, obviously, is part of the Orthodox faith. We have Igor Lopatanok, who is a great filmmaker and producer out of California, who actually works with Oliver Stone. One of their most famous documentaries as of late is Ukraine on Fire.
mhm,
We have John Pierce on our board, who actually is an American but was raised Serbian and was baptized in a Serbian Orthodox church in Pennsylvania. He defends most of the January 6th cases.
mhm,
And we also have a Romanian guy, Nick Dorneanu, and Nick actually sits on the board of the Trump organization in
mhm.
Chicago.
Oh wow.
So, I mean, we have a great team that we have formed. We are open to bringing new people onto this team as members of our advisory council. We would love to, as I kind of went through the names, you notice we have a Serb, we have a Greek, we have an
Yeah.
Italian, we have, everybody from countries that actually sees the value in creating a political front. Now, as I said, this is a non-for-profit organization. So yes, the background to all of us, as you said, is very political. We see eye to eye on many domestic policies, on
Mhm.
many geopolitical issues.
Yes.
And as Orthodox Christians, I think the idea is to inform those policies and educate, first of all, our populations, make sure that they vote, make sure that they register to vote, make sure that they're educated voters once November comes.
Mhm,
So that is kind of like the primary goal right now of the Christian Orthodox Coalition in the United States. For short, we call it caucus.
mhm,
And then in phase two, what I'm thinking, obviously, we're cheering that President Trump wins.
mhm,
But no matter what happens in November, what we all, I think, agree upon is that all of us must have a common organization that will go through major policies and have a seat at the table where it matters most with any political entity, with both political parties, with independent voters.
mhm,
When you look at a lot of Orthodox immigrants, they're your like old school Kennedy Democrats
mhm,
because that's kind of the areas where they flock to. And most of the immigrants, again, live in key swing states.
mhm.
So we certainly can have a tremendous impact on elections. And you mentioned 7 million. I'm operating on the numbers between 10 and 12 simply because when we look at all of the Orthodox churches and
Yeah.
the data that they have, and then the families, I mean, if you count just generationally, if we have been in this country since the late 1700s, 1800s, those numbers certainly are climbing.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, and here's another job, I think, common job for all of us, I think. And I was asked this question. We launched our Coalition on X. So we
Hmm.
hosted a space, and there was a question about numbers. We actually don't have the precise numbers, and that is one really unfortunate part, not on behalf of Orthodoxy, but I think on behalf of all of these immigrant communities. I
Hmm.
call them immigrant
Yeah.
communities, even though we're all American,
Hmm.
um, where we, even our churches don't have the exact numbers.
Yeah.
Serbs are estimated to be at about 1.2 million in the United States. You've got Russians at about the same number.
Hmm.
You've got the Greeks at about maybe 1.7 million,
Hmm.
but we don't have the precise numbers. So
Yeah.
Christian Orthodox Coalition, for example, could be the catalyst to gather this data, to
Yeah.
actually track where our parishes are. And again, granted, not all Orthodox Christians go to church,
Hmm. Yeah.
but that reality still should not change our political potential and our political influence that we may have, whether they attend church regularly or not, or whether any church has them on their roster as members. I think there is a wider group of people that we can collect, um, that ranges on the numbers that I'm mentioning, but that would be a job for all of us, to,
Hmm.
because we don't show up on the census. For
Yeah.
example, again, I'm going back to the Serbs being here since the 1800s and generationally being here. There are there are about 350,000 Serbian Americans in the Chicagoland area only.
Hmm.
The census figures are there are 170,000 of them in the United States. So the census figures
Yeah.
don't represent the accurate numbers,
Hmm.
is what I'm trying to say. So here's what all of us can do together. People can go to our website, christianorthodoxcoalition.org. They can reach out to us. As I said, we are expanding. We just launched. It's a new effort, but we want to do this in phase one and phase two. Phase one being up till November, and then phase two being a wider coalition that can actually do some of this work and have that political impact and access and influence, just like other communities do. For some reason, we still haven't been able to come together and do that. And as I said, I think some of you guys are doing a great job discussing theology and discussing the background of all of this.
Hmm.
Everybody that's on this board is very much a political animal. So it's not really an idea about, we can have certainly theological discussions, but I think the
Hmm.
dominant mission for us is to gather all of our voices together and create that impact, because especially that impact can be powerful, in the geopolitical terms and in foreign policy.
Exactly. Yeah. I think every Orthodox Christian I've met is way more geopolitically aware than most people, knowing what's happening, in Ukraine and Russia, what's happening in Serbia and the Balkans, what's happening in Israel, in the Middle East, because
Yes,
that
absolutely.
all these events that we see in the news, it's like that's where the Orthodox Christians are. So it's really important that the most the U.S. has the most geopolitical influence in the entire
Yes.
world. So having a coalition where people will get more familiar with these ideas, I think, is really important. And
Thank you.
speaking of having the right audience, recently you actually had a private audience with the Patriarch of Serbia.
Yes,
Yeah.
so I was in Serbia this past month. I anticipated to go on vacation, but because I'm still part of the Trump team, and
Yeah.
Serbs for Trump are very much alive. We
Hmm.
actually had a huge event at the RNC in Milwaukee, and I'm very close with Ambassador Rick Grenell and
Hmm.
Colonel Doug McGregor and General
Yeah.
Flynn and Roger Stone, and all of these people are very much in tune with what we're trying to do. So we actually had Rick Grinnell and Matt Gaetz and Congresswoman
Wow.
Claudia Tenney and Senator Ron Johnson at our Serbs for Trump event in Milwaukee as part of the official agenda of the RNC. So that was really fabulous. And,
Wow.
as I said, all of this kind of extends into um, this Christian Orthodox coalition. So I went to Serbia thinking, and to Italy and
Mm.
Hungary thinking I would be on vacation, and then assassination attempt happened.
Oh, yeah.
Like the third day I was there.
Yeah.
And then the media kind of got the glimpse of, me actually being there on the ground. So it was crazy work every day being in the media and kind of talking about the Trump team and Christian Orthodox coalition and what we're
Mm.
trying to do. And because I'm so well connected in the Balkans, in the political realm, having my father being connected to the politics and the church particularly,
Mhm.
for many years. I had a private audience with His Holiness Patriarch Porphyrius, so I did actually present this idea of the Christian Orthodox coalition to him, given the fact that, and I'll be very open about this, and I understand, and I think he also understood, when I launched Serbs for Trump, the initial, I guess, the deep down, the first thing that you think of, well, let me reach out to all of my Orthodox parishes here in the United States and tell them what
Yeah.
we're doing, not necessarily asking for blessing, but I'm just telling them, here's what we're going to represent as Serbs, as a
Mhm.
political entity within the Trump campaign. And I'll say I did get a little bit of a lecture from several bishops saying, oh,
Mm.
we can't get involved. We don't get involved politically.
Mhm.
And I get that. The
Yeah.
church must be protected. It should not be compromised in any way. But now looking at an organization that is, kind of a non-for-profit educational organization, it can certainly create that connection with our parishes, with our churches, with certain interests that the church has, as much as we would like to deny it, but the church does have a huge political interest one
Mhm.
way or the other.
It does.
So it has to be there, and the church is there to take care of our spiritual life, and I
Mhm.
understand that, and it should be left alone to do that. But us as Orthodox Christians and as members of society, then we have a civic duty and a constitutional duty to actually represent our common issues, our policies through that prism of our faith. So that's sort of the idea. The church doesn't have to be involved
Mhm.
politically, but certainly we can serve as vessels to that type of representation that we as Orthodox Christians and members of a secular society should actually have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we should have a voice, and it's important that we use our voice, because people are using, they want to use and subvert the church. Like the American government has funded movements to try and subvert certain things within the Orthodox Church in
Yes.
America. There's a well-known
And even
quote.
around the world, I mean,
Yeah.
certainly there are many problems that are being funded by NGOs and different elements of the US government. Well, that's why orthodoxy again is so important, because
Hmm.
if you notice, they're not really trying to subvert Islam, they're
Hmm.
not really trying to subvert the Catholics in the same
Hmm.
way, although the Catholics have, not all, not everybody,
Hmm.
not individually, but institutionally, I feel they're
Yes.
folding a little bit to the wokeness. So have the
Yeah.
evangelicals, so have the Protestants. What is still standing strong with all our problems that we can admit to, but we still have not folded.
Yeah, exactly. I remember seeing this quote. I think it was like a U.S. military general who talked about how the Serbian Orthodox Church is a like a barrier, or it's something in the way of having the U.S. Western influence, in
Yes.
Serbia. So they don't see the church as like a holy institution. They see it as like a geopolitical thing that they want to control.
Well, and there's a reason for that,
Yeah.
because most Orthodox Christians, I can speak for the Serbs, but I can also speak for the
Hmm.
Greeks and for the Ukrainians and Russians. They tend to, given the history, the harsh history that they've been through politically, they tend to mistrust politicians
Yes.
or distrust
Hmm.
politicians with a good reason. But who do they still believe the most, or what do they believe in? The church,
Yes.
because the church is what kept all of these communities in these harsh environments alive, essentially.
Hmm.
So when all else fails, and that's why I said, interestingly, you live in Yugoslavia, for example, or Soviet Union, and you go through this, speck of time of communist socialist indoctrination. The moment that falls apart, well, what do you fall back on? Your
Yeah.
faith, who you
Exactly.
are.
Yeah.
And that time is coming. And I think more and more, hence why, Americans are discovering Orthodox Christianity, because
Hmm.
it's a very authentic experience of God,
Yeah.
unlike um, you know other denominations. So
Hmm.
there is a tendency of decline in adherence to any religion, and yet Orthodox Christianity is growing.
Yeah.
There's a very specific reason for that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that was really attractive about Orthodoxy. Is not only do you get this like amazing reverent experience, but you get a living church that has withstood so much persecution from the
Yes,
Ottomans, from communists, and that's what we can put our hope in. It is
from
God.
NATO.
Is yeah, from NATO, from whatever it is. Ultimately, Christ Church is going to prevail, and
Yes.
I think that's a great place to end it. If anyone has any questions for Olga, please comment them below. If you wanna help, you can email me, or you can get connected on the website. But I'm really excited about this. I think as Orthodoxy grows, it's important that we have political representation, especially since we have really good politics too.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you so much for your
And I
time.
think we stand on the side of the truth.
Yes.
And that is, again, the truth is informed by our Orthodox faith. And we have a lot to offer to this nation and to everything that is going on in the world. We should be that light and that
Yes.
pillar that continues standing strong. And so, please, if you can, share our website, ChristianOrthodoxCoalition.org. We are on X at C Orthodox C. You guys can find also through Serbs for Trump. I mean, we're out there
Hmm.
through many socials, but I think this Christian Orthodox Coalition has longevity. It has a future, and that future is sitting with all of us right now. And it's up to us to make something out of this. But the platform is there. We are very, very open to working with everyone. And I can't share too much, but we're going to have a big launching event in Chicago, likely on August 29th. So please stay in touch with us.
Hmm.
Stay tuned so that you can come to that event, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll have all the links down below if anyone's
Yes,
interested. But
please.
thank you so much. God bless.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yep. Bye.